Welcome back to Big Riff Energy. Today we're going to be talking about our 2021 EP, Forge Your Future. First, I want to remind you, our brand new album, Ghost at the Gallows, will be out in a few weeks. The limited edition vinyl is moving fast. It's almost gone, and I'm recording this in advance, so some of these might be gone. Sorry if it's too late. If you're in Europe or UK, Evil Greed, baby. Get that dark green, forest green, if you will. The record was inspired by the forest, so that's awfully fitting. Scoop up that dark green from Evil Greed. If you're in North America, go to our home base for merchandise, Night Shift merch. Straight out of my home state of Florida. Pick up that silver vinyl. That's the band exclusive color. Plus a bunch of other exclusive stuff. There's an album tee. There's a logo patch. There's a Hangman t-shirt design, plus a bunch of other stuff. Night Shift merch. Kareem's the best. Babyface, you the best. Also, the most limited version of the vinyl, Ruby Red at Revolver. Shouts out to Revolver for always supporting Spirit Adrift. Okay, that's my plug. We are playing the very first Metal Injection Festival. We're ready to go. That is September 17th. We will have silver copies of that vinyl as well in person, but not a whole lot. Playing with Testament, Fear Factory, a bunch of other really cool bands. Can't wait for that. I think that's it for news and updates and that sort of thing. Really excited for that new record to come out. I can't wait. And as a perfectly smooth and natural transition, that new record came out of a really, really long and fruitful writing and demo session that began in March of 2020, which produced the 3 songs on Forge Your Future as well. So look at that for a natural and non-forced transition from a shameless plug into the topic of today's episode. Okay, so I think the last making of was, well, I know it was Enlightened. I think it left off with us finishing that album, releasing that album, playing what few shows we did. Not little shows, they were big, cool shows, but very few of them because of the pandemic. So yeah, January of 2020, Enlightened was finished as far as the recording and everything like that. My involvement in the creative aspect of that album was over January 2020, and it didn't come out until October of 2020. So that's quite a lapse. I think that's like the longest between finishing the recording and releasing the album. Our new album actually was finished in October of 2022 and is coming out in August of 2023. So that's a pretty long one too. But okay, January of 2020. It was either January or February. You know what? It might have been December 2019. I was cruising around with my wife and I had a riff in my head and whipped the phone out, hummed it into the phone. Forgot about it. Went about my business, made Enlighten an Eternity, whatever. And then fast forward to March 1st, 2020, we moved to Texas, unload our stuff, moved into our house in one day. Me and my wife crushed it. She would be great on tour if it wasn't a super scary danger zone having your significant other on tour. So we got our stuff unloaded in one day, went to a wedding in the Seattle area the next week. And the next week we were locked down. And a few days into that lockdown, after, 48, 72 hours of freaking out internally and wondering what the hell's going on and all that, I was feeling bad, man. Everybody was scared and freaked out, confused. And then I reminded myself, hey, pick up a guitar, because that always helps me feel better, right? So I picked up a guitar. I wrote a song that first day called These Two Hands, which is on our new record. It's track 4 on the new record. The second song that I wrote and demoed, probably the next day or within the next couple days, had that riff that I had hummed into my phone when we were still in Phoenix. And that was the main opening riff of Forge Your Future that shows up all throughout that song. It's the intro riff. There's a reprise on harmony guitars. There's like a reprise with the solo. I figured out lots of different ways of utilizing that sequence of notes. And yeah, that was what I hummed into my phone. I think late 2019, more than likely. And then that first week of lockdown, I fleshed out a whole song from that one riff. That was Forge Your Future. Nobody knows what's going on. While I'm tracking and demoing and writing all these songs, we've got Enlightened in the can. And Enlightened was a joint release between 20 Bucks Spin and Century Media. So I'm talking to Dave at 20 Bucks Spin. I'm talking to Century Media. We're figuring everything out. We're figuring out photo shoots. We're figuring out music videos. We're doing all that. And I'm just writing songs every day, writing stuff every day. A lot of it didn't get used. But the writing was just to keep me sane through this early phase of COVID, when people weren't sure if like you're going to get an Amazon package and it's going to kill you. Like, we were literally that unsure of everything. I remember everybody, Jesus Christ. I remember seeing that people were like going to war in the supermarkets over toilet paper, which still doesn't make sense. That still, there's not a single, I know some like brainiac psychologist people were trying to explain like, oh, it's all about control, having control over situations and something that you can understand. We all understand toilet paper. That's bullshit. That doesn't make any sense. Buying guns, I got that. Buying food and other supplies, I understood that. But climbing over each other like it's Black Friday to get to toilet paper, like, if you can't wipe your ass, you're not going to die. If you don't eat, you'll die, you know? So I still don't get that. And I wrote a song sort of inspired from the cynicism and anger I was feeling towards people that were foolish and selfish and ignorant and crazy enough to be fighting each other over toilet paper during a difficult time when they could be helping each other out, you know? That song was Invisible Enemy. That's something that our president was saying a lot at the time. And I sort of twisted it around, pointed it back at people like him and people like the people that were choking each other out to try to get to the fucking snuggle toilet paper or whatever. So Invisible Enemy was written early on, for sure. And I didn't know what I was working on. I didn't know if it kind of was like the very beginning of Spirit Adrift, when I was just writing songs. I wasn't putting any thought into like, do these go together? Is this going to be an album? Is this going to be an EP? Is this going to be singles? There wasn't any thought of the outcome. It was more of just using songwriting as a means to not be just miserable every day with everything that was going on. So I had already written probably 5 or 6 songs within the first few weeks, I would say. Meanwhile, I'm talking to Century Media about a few other ideas. There was some discussion of like cover songs. We started talking about that. The original idea was that with the next Spirit Adrift full-length album, we were going to do something similar to what Metallica did on And Justice for All, which is every single advanced single that they put out, they would release it on vinyl with a cover on the B-side, or I think a couple of them had a live track on the B-side. So Philip at Century Media and I were talking about that. So that was the genesis of this idea of having some cover songs, which obviously didn't come out until a couple years later on 20 Centuries Gone, right? But that's why we had 6 covers, because we were thinking 3 advanced singles. You know me, I was like, well, let's do 2 covers. Fuck one, let's do 2. So I think in like December 2020, I tracked all my parts for those covers at home. And they just kind of sat until the next year, maybe even like 2 years later. So there was a lot going on. I'm writing original material every day. I was working on those covers at some point. And I sort of realized like this song that I had, Forge Your Future, went very well with this other song that was written when I was pissed off about the toilet paper warriors, the Mad Max toilet paper Thunderdome Vikings or whatever. That song was called Invisible Enemy. And I was like, man, those two go really well together. And this other song, These Two Hands, like, isn't really, I mean, it could have worked with those songs, but those two songs definitely had like a distinct identity in common and a distinct vibe. Real rocking, you know. These Two Hands is much different than that. It's one of my favorite songs I've ever written, but it's very different than those other two. So then at some point there was discussion of an EP, and that's what ended up happening. I think by that time, you know, I would say I had the 3 songs from Forge Your Future demoed, first version of each song demoed by April or May of 2020. And so then I really started focusing on those, whittling parts down, changing parts, working on the arrangements, improving the riffs. You know, Wake Up was the 3rd song. You know, that might even come before Invisible Enemy, because I just remember, just being frustrated with humanity, even more so than usual, and just wishing people would wake the fuck up and realize, like, yo, you grabbing toilet paper out of the hands of an old woman is not making your life any better. You're not any safer. And it's a toxic way of living, and you're hurting other people and you're hurting yourself, you know? So I want to write kind of a hippie song. That was Wake Up. I think all that stuff came out of the same place. Forge Your Future was written first when I was a little more hopeful. I think, like, we're going to get through this. I feel like for the first 2 or 3 days, it was like a feeling of unity. I remember that, like, very briefly thinking like, whoa, all right, people are like being kind of cool. And that just like evaporated at some point. And that's where the other 2 songs came from, was a place of real like frustration and cynicism. So I tuned those songs up. I was working on them for a while. At the time I was listening to a lot of Merciful Fate, this band behind me from Slovakia, Malokarpatan. I'll talk about them later. Diamond Head, you know, a lot of new wave of British heavy metal. I remember I was watching the Richard Ramirez Night Stalker documentary series on Netflix, and so I was getting some real inspiration from that. That sort of evil shit was working its way in. You know, Invisible Enemy's got a real spooky like midsection. I remember like writing that and visualizing what it must have been like to have the Night Stalker coming in through your window in the middle of the night. So yeah, it was very metal. Like my inspirations were very much like metal, straight ahead, rocking, epic metal, plus a little bit of Night Stalker in there. And there's, you know, of course, the Richard Ramirez AC/DC connection. So the vibe was becoming like very apparent to me as I was improving this material and really honing it down with the goal of an EP in mind. Meanwhile, I'm still like writing other stuff. So I have an EP going that I'm very certain that's an EP. I've got cover songs going that I think are going to be B-sides to advanced singles for the next album. And I'm working on material that I'm pretty sure is going to be the next full-length album. Also planning the release of Enlightened Eternity. Talking to my friend Garrett from Garrett. He was living in Portugal at the time. He did 2 of the music videos. Well, no, 1 of the music videos from Enlightened and 1 from Forge Your Future. So we were planning those out, I think probably at the same time. We did a music video for Battle High in Phoenix. I think that happened like in July, of course, July 2020 in Phoenix. So just doing something every day, doing whatever I could to keep the momentum going forward, despite the fact that there's no live shows and we don't know if there ever will be. We don't know if everybody on earth is going to die. Scary shit. And I did what I know to do, which is make music and make art and stay creative, you know? At some point, I started talking to my friend Kuba in Poland. I had seen some shirt designs that he had done for Pallbearer and I think Yob, and I really liked his style. And so I commissioned him. That was a very lengthy process and a lot of correspondence. He did, you know, the front cover with the guy going through the portal. A little bit inspired by the cover of Death, symbolic, if you will, right? But obviously our version of that. He did an original piece of art for all 3 songs. And so the back of the vinyl or CD, actually the vinyl comes with a CD in it. The back is for Wake Up. You know, your boys there waking up and smelling the coffee, seeing the coffee, definitely seeing a lot of shit. And then this insert, which has lyrics on one side and Invisible Enemy on the other. So I started talking to him probably as soon as the first version of the lyrics were finished. I wanted the lyrics to be real straightforward. I remember writing Forge Your Future from start to finish. Not the music, but the lyrics. I sat down and wrote. Those are my favorite lyrics I've ever written. And usually I just write some real introspective, metaphorical, heavy stuff. And I kind of was thinking, let me tell a story. Like all our songs have a real story attached to them. But I wanted it to be a lot more direct. It's still metaphorical, but it's way more of like a Dio approach to writing lyrics, where you're telling a story with a lot of imagery. There's a journey. You know, it's like 3 acts. There's 3 verses, which is kind of hard to get away with rock songs, but I think I did it. And there's a journey. It's like a hero's journey. And it's not fantasy. It's completely 100% based on what I was going through early COVID when I was still sort of optimistic. Been through a lot of challenges in life, you know, and there's only one option, really, just to keep going. And that's what that song's about. And it ain't over till it's over, you know. But yeah, I remember sitting down with a notebook, and I write lyrics by hand. I don't ever use like a laptop or anything like that. And I wrote those lyrics and got excited, man. I still think those are the best lyrics I've ever written. The lyrics of Wake Up, I remember intentionally wanting to do something just as straightforward and basic as possible, AC/DC style, Bob Daisley style, maybe even not as fancy and metaphorical and spiritual as Bob Daisley lyrics. He wrote the early Ozzy stuff, for those of you that don't know. It was inspired by Buddhism and all kinds of craziness. Very, very like imaginative guy. So I wanted Wake Up to be somewhere between, like Spinal Tap, AC/DC stupidity, and Bob Daisley clever, right? Fine line between stupid and clever. I was trying to find the exact pinpoint of that line. And then Invisible Enemy, yeah, was coming from straight up hatred and frustration. It's not the first song that I've wrote about an imaginary character murdering a United States president, but it might be the best one. Probably my favorite song that I've written about killing a president. Not me doing it, obviously, but just some like third party. So yeah, once I had those lyrics done, sent them to Cuba and Poland. He got cracking. Decided to do this one with Ryan Bram again. You know, once it was becoming more obvious that we're going to be able to fly and stuff like that. Like, okay, set up some recording dates. And in typical fashion, the studio recording session began basically like a year after I started writing. So I flew to Tucson, or I might have flown to Phoenix. Yeah, I think I flew to Phoenix and we drove to Tucson in March of 2021. And went to Homewrecker again, tracked with Ryan Bram. It was Marcus on drums, me on bass, guitar, vocals, and Marcus's brother Preston on keys. And I think we probably had about a week or so. And I want to say it was like, I mentioned this on a previous episode, March 27th. We watched a UFC, and it was this dude, Francis Ngannou, fought the heavyweight champ at the time and won the belt. That was March 27th. Which really like directly ties in with the themes of this EP we were working on. I'm not going to get into that too much, but this dude basically escaped, I don't want to say slavery, but definitely like working in a mine for no money type of life. Many escape attempts trying to get from Africa to Europe. Finally got to Europe. Just like wandered into a boxing gym because he grew up watching Mike Tyson on VHS. And on a faster track than anybody that has ever done it, ended up winning a title in the UFC, becoming a multimillionaire. And the guy has actually just recently done some stuff that's going to like change the face of the sport as far as fighter pay and fighter rights. I don't want to make this like an MMA episode, but that's literally what the song Forge Your Future is about. And we got to watch this dude win the title, I think on the last day of recording, or maybe second to last day. But I mean, it couldn't have been more fitting and more perfect. The guy's a total hero. And that's what he did. If you read the lyrics to Forge Your Future, I mean, it's pretty much like tells his story, which is the story of anyone who has overcome like really brutal challenges and really brutal struggles in life and, you know, shaped their own destiny despite all that stuff. So that was cool. That's definitely my strongest memory attached to the recording session. I think we knocked out drums like in 1 day, 2 days. Did all the rhythm guitar and stuff like that. Like I said, I was like really focusing on, not focusing, just listening to a lot of new wave of British heavy metal, Old Priest, Old Maiden. When we got our puppies, they loved, for whatever reason, if I would put like old Pantera live videos, bootlegs on YouTube, they would go apeshit. So I was listening to a lot of old live Pantera concerts because the dogs just like, it was like you flipping on a switch. They would just go fucking ballistic. Merciful Fate, like I said, all kinds of stuff like that. This band Malokarpatan, newer band from Slovakia. But I was also really interested in Hysteria by Def Leppard. Not the songs, really. Not the lyrics, not the music. More just kind of the production. And the layering of guitars and the layering of harmony vocals and still managing to maintain like a lot of clarity and everything's cutting through, you know, that was like heavy on my mind at the time. So we tracked a lot of clean guitar on Forge Your Future, using a Roland Jazz Chorus, my favorite clean amp ever, the best clean amp ever. And something that we did a lot of that we had only sort of dabbled with in the past was tracking clean guitar while there's heavy guitar going on. So if the heavy guitar is like chugging on a power chord or something, maybe put like some different chord voicings in there on clean guitar doing single notes along to the rhythm, you know? And that has become one of my favorite things to do in the studio. I love it. It adds such a cool, mystical dimension to the sound, you know? And yeah, adding a lot of harmony vocals. I've always had a lot of harmony vocals on Spirit Adrift recordings. I do fake choirs, you know, I'll layer up my own voice 16 tracks or something to create like a choir effect. But we did more than that, of that than we even normally would. So I remember that being really pumped on trying to aim for like a more metal underground version of Hysteria, like production tricks, which is a lot easier now with technology than it was back then. You don't need $10 million recording budget in order to make that happen. One of my favorite moments was the harmony guitar section in Forge Your Future when Preston put organ on it. He was kind of doing everything on the fly, so we didn't know if certain parts were going to be old like mono synth sounds or what, you know, and he threw an organ on that. And I think that's the first time that somebody has ever combined the influence of Lynyrd Skynyrd and Judas Priest in equal measure, and it like worked. And I just remember being so pumped on that organ under those guitar harmonies. Like I feel like it's very special when you can do something that hasn't really been done before. Maybe some version of it has been done before, but nobody's ever done it exactly like that. And those are the things you remember and feel very proud of. And that, I mean, that was mainly on Preston. I just wrote a typical kind of Spirit Adrift guitar harmony section, but that organ, man, took like, it just kind of, I felt like it took every bit of all of our musical influences and just put them together in a blender into something new, you know? And the end of that, you know, Eric from Gatecreeper came in at one point during the session. He was like, damn, that sounds like Kansas, the end of Forge Your Future. And man, that's like the best compliment you could ever get from the Dark Cowboy. Yeah, the outro with the clean guitars and the synth and the vocal harmonies all building up. So I really think, I think this is my best songwriting to date at the time. You know, a big thing of songwriting is not just like, okay, I got 6 really badass riffs, that's enough for a song, and then you put them together. The trick is like figuring out a little 2-second transition that people don't see coming, that you do the first time but not the second time, or maybe you do it the first, or not the first time but you do it the second time, and then you do something else the third time. It's little stuff like that. And I've always been conscious of that, but I think I really dialed it in with these songs on Forge Your Future. Also, I think the production tricks, like everybody involved, every time you make a record, you learn something, you know, whether it's me or Ryan Bram or whoever, you learn something. And I legitimately feel like every Spirit Adrift release, objectively in a lot of ways, is better than the previous release. Whether you like the songs more or less, obviously that's subjective. But to me, like if I was a carpenter or something, it's exciting making something because I'm like, oh man, this thing that I just made is so much better than the last thing that I just made. You know, I work really hard. I keep an open mind, and I'm like pretty satisfied with what I've done. And I can definitely rest easy with what I've done, but I'm like not satisfied enough to stop learning or stop trying to figure out a new way of doing something better or cooler or different or whatever. And I think it really culminated on Forge Your Future. With the exception of the new album, which isn't out yet, this is my favorite Spirit Adrift release. Song-wise, production-wise, everything. The artwork, I think it's so rad that every song got its own artwork. We did that again on Ghost at the Gallows. Just the presentation, like if you're just listening, I'm showing the insert. It's got the Invisible Enemy artwork on one side, which is brilliant, psychedelic, mayhem, outer space, Cthulhu, but also Carl Jung. Me and Kuba talked a lot about Carl Jung and, you know, the shadow and all that kind of stuff. But even just like the colors, man, the lyric sheet is beautiful. The presentation, all the artwork, it's just so concise and there's just no mistakes on it, really. Like there's nothing lacking. It's not perfect because I don't like for music to be perfect. I think that's lame. Pretty soon AI is going to be making music and it's going to be quote unquote perfect and it's going to suck. So it's not perfect, but there's nothing wrong with this. And I honest to God think this is the first Spirit Adrift release that came out that I could listen to the whole thing and just kind of appreciate it for what it is and not be overwhelmed by like, damn, I could have done that better if there was more time. I could have done that better if I'd have known that. It could always be better, but yeah, I mean, this is easily at the time my favorite Spirit Adrift release. And it's a shame it was just an EP because they don't really get as much love or attention as a full length, you know, but I remember me and Philip at Century Media talking about like, what are the EPs that people talk about the most, like the best ones. We talked about Haunting the Chapel a lot. You know, that's one of Slayer's best releases. So I want to talk about Zeus, who mixed and mastered this. I remember it was 2020 and I was thinking about, well, okay, we're going to track with Bram because we love him and we've done that before and it was awesome. But like I said, I always want to try to push it and try new stuff and that sort of thing. So I was kind of racking my brain of like, what's some records that I really love the sound of and who are some people that just consistently make stuff that I really like. And I remember, you know, going through my phone on Wikipedia and just like hunting people down and stuff. And I started thinking about Zeus. You know, I've been familiar with this dude since the 2000s because he was like a central key figure of like metal guitar type bands coming back, like Shadows Fall being the big one. And I remember reading Guitar World magazine. This is like at the height of nu metal. And The Art of Balance had come out and people were like, Shadows Fall is making like Metallica type music cool again, you know? And I remember checking that band out and thinking they were really cool. And then Zeus did The Art of Partying, which was a record that like blew up Municipal Waste, right? And I remember in 2020, I was driving around listening to one of my favorite records that came out in 2020, thinking that the production was like incredible. You know, I'm kind of like narrowing my choices down on who's going to mix and master this. And yeah, listen to a record that came out in 2020 thinking like, damn, this sounds so good, you know? And then I put on Sever the Wicked Hand, which is a 2011 Crowbar album, which I kind of missed because I was like out in the stratosphere for one thing, but I was moving from Arkansas to Arizona when that record came out and I sort of missed it. And Eric had played it on a couple tours and I just remember being like, knowing it's Crowbar obviously, but being like, what the fuck is this? And then talking about that record and then sort of realizing like that might be the best Crowbar record. And I talked to Kirk about it. I talked to Robin about it and Tommy Buckley. And it's like, it's special. That's a special record. And it is sonically, it's about as heavy a record as ever been made to me, while still sounding really good. And that's a Zeus mix and master, right? What was striking about that is he didn't track the music. So he was delivered the music and he just mixed and mastered it and managed to make it sound just like, again, I think one of the heaviest sounding records ever. And there's clean guitar and there's a lot of melody. It's the Crowbar record that I would say is most similar to what I'm trying to do with Spirit Adrift. Not that it sounds like us or we sound like them, but for them, that record has a lot of peaks and valleys dynamically and a lot of melody and super heavy parts, slow parts, mid-tempo, fast, clean guitar. So I had been listening to this record that came out in 2020 thinking it sounded killer, which it does. But then I put on Sever the Wicked Hand and I was like, holy shit. And the difference was like astounding, putting them side by side like that. So I reached out to Zeus, or had somebody at Century Media probably introduce us, and we hopped on the phone, and turns out the dude is one of the coolest fucking people in the world. Just like, we're very, very similar with what we like, and maybe even more importantly, what we hate and what we don't like. And all we talked about that first day of speaking on the phone was, well, we talked about Sever the Wicked Hand, and he kind of told me his approach to mixing that and everything. And then we just talked about Martin Birch. If you're listening to this, you know who Martin Birch is, or you should. If you don't, look him up. But that's Zeus's favorite producer. That's probably my favorite metal producer, I would say. So we just talked about Martin Birch and all the great things about the records he made, and how other people who have worked with those bands, what they weren't maybe doing as well as him. And yeah, I mean, I was already kind of convinced just listening to his work that Zeus was the guy. But after speaking to him, it was like, whoa, all right, we're probably going to be buds for the rest of our lives. And so far, that's true. I love Zeus. So yeah, we finished tracking this thing and sent it off to Zeus, and he mixed and mastered it. And I'm pretty sure every song was right on the first version. I'm like 99% sure. He might have been like, oh, let me do this again. But we were just like, every song that we heard, we're like, yeah, that's it. And that's a first, man. That is a first. And even with Zeus since then, it hasn't been quite that easy. But like, it was just magical coming out of the gate. So backing up to the end of tracking in Tucson, I burned the lyrics when we were done. I always do that. And we watched Francis Ngannou commit a manslaughter on TV and get the heavyweight belt, which was so inspiring and badass. Still is. That'll be forever linked in my mind to this recording. Just a perfect, again, like perfect real life example of what I was trying to get across with the title track here. And so my wife and I had already moved to Texas. When I flew on a one-way ticket to Phoenix, made this record in Tucson, and then I had been tasked with driving a single cab Dodge Ram, which I think had the same engine as like a big ass Dodge Ram, but is one cab with a short bed. I drove that thing from Tucson back to Austin. And that was so much fun. That was like one of the best experiences that I had in the 2 years of the COVID lockdowns. And I didn't know that the thing had a USB jack, so I could have been listening to whatever I wanted. It was like hiding in the center console. So I thought I was just bound to FM radio, which I'm so glad that happened, because that was such a fun experience. You know, we'd been talking about Def Leppard Hysteria, the whole recording session, right? The production tricks and how to get a chorus to sound bigger. And Zeus, by the way, hates that record. He likes the first two, but yeah, when we were tracking, we were talking about Hysteria a lot. And I remember getting in the car at the end of the recording session and turned on The Mountain in Tucson, and they're playing Rocket from Hysteria. And Marcus and I were like, holy shit. Like, synchronicity is a big thing with Spirit Adrift. It's a constant. When the band is active, whether it's touring, writing, whatever, the synchronicity is like unavoidable. Marcus isn't like a voodoo, hippy dippy, mystical person. I'll describe him as an agnostic atheist, right? I think that's how he would describe himself. But hearing Rocket from Hysteria, we were both like, what the fuck is going on right now, man? So that was cool. And that was the beginning of my journey home. I listened to FM classic rock radio for that whole drive home. I stopped in Fort Stockton, which is where you stop. I remember like the overall vibe on Forge Your Future was so awesome compared to the previous record when I was like dealing with all the horrible shit that was going on. Which sounds ironic because we made Forge like well into COVID and a lot of people had died and stuff like that. But, and not trying to minimize that, but just in my personal life, things were so much better. And I just remember really enjoying making this EP. And yeah, driving that little mean ass Dodge Ram and just blowing people's doors off listening to FM rock radio. Like all my favorite stuff I grew up listening to when I was 15, 16, driving around listening to FM rock radio, man. And that was a really cool journey. The whole thing, you know, was a journey. And I remember stopping in Fort Stockton, which if you're in a touring band, you've stayed in Fort Stockton. That's the only way of getting from Texas to the West Coast or vice versa. And just feeling so fulfilled, man. Feeling so fulfilled. Being trapped for a year during COVID, no shows, no nothing, just those fake live stream bullshit things that I hated that made me want to quit music. And then getting to like go on an adventure and getting to go in the studio, like going on adventures where you don't know what the hell's happening, especially like solo by myself. That's one of my favorite things in the world. And going in the studio and making records is one of my favorite things in the world. And I got to do all that. And driving fast and listening to FM rock radio is one of my favorite things in the world. And staying in the middle of nowhere in a motel. I mean, it was like all of my favorite things. I got to do all of them, you know, right out of the gate. First big thing that I did post-COVID lockdown. And it was that trip home that I wrote in my head the song I Shall Return from our new record. And dude, there's been enough hints on this fucking podcast at this point. If y'all can't figure out, like I told you the answer to the first line, somebody goddamn figure it out. It's not Lord of the Rings, man. So yeah, got home, got the artwork, sent it off to Zeus. He did his thing and it was out in August, I think. And yeah, I'll talk about Guillermo, my friend that's in Garrett. I met this dude when he was singing live for the Ominous Circle back in 2017, I think. 18. We played 18. Played some shows together. And he mentioned that he made music videos. And he's since become one of my best buds in the game and a really solid creative partner. He made the video for Wake Up, which I was definitely going for like some fun Bill and Ted meets Fire in the Sky or Close Encounters kind of thing, you know, with some like fear and loathing in there, maybe a little bit of that. You know, the message is like to wake up. If you hate your life, fix it. If you're choking out a grandma for single ply at the fucking Target, you need to like do something. Look in the mirror, literally or metaphorically, right? And fix your stupid ass life, you asshole. So that's what that song's about. And that's what that video is about. And Guillermo nailed it, man. I sent him like little stupid treatments, very simple. And he comes back with all kinds of epic ideas and uses really good actors, like really interesting actors. He did the Screaming for Beyond video from Enlighten and Eternity as well. I love that video. And he did Hear Her for Divided by Darkness. And the man is a real artist. There's a lot of forces that are going to push you to put out video content, right? To push your music or whatever. And Guillermo's not interested in that. And he makes it like feasible for a band like us to make something that has some sort of artistic merit, you know. And I'm really psyched on all 3 of those videos that he's done for us. But Wake Up is definitely like the most fun. That one rules. I like it a lot. So yeah, that happened at some point. Who knows? But yeah, this thing came out in August of 2021. We went to New York, October of 2021. Did a couple shows with High on Fire. The only time that we played Wake Up ever live was in Phoenix at the Rebel Lounge as a warm-up gig. I don't want to say warm-up gig because it was a great show, but our first gig post-COVID, the day before we flew out for the High on Fire shows. And I think Rob Halford had just like successfully treated his cancer. That had just happened. And obviously that song was like very much inspired by Judas Priest. And Halford's a Phoenix guy. So we decided to play it for him. And that's the only time we played it. Then yeah, we went to New York, played with High on Fire and Dysrhythmia, who I used to see in Arkansas all the time. Pretty sure we've been playing Forge Your Future since this came out. That's a staple. I think if I had to pick a favorite Spirit Adrift song, it would be that one. Either that one or Ride Into the Light. You know, I think objectively speaking, those are our 2 best songs. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's it, man. We really didn't. There was a lot of personnel mysteries during the COVID thing. Everybody handled it differently, you know, and there's no right or wrong way to handle that. But we were figuring out guitar player positions, bass player positions. Got Sonny at some point in 2019 or early 20, right? He made his first appearance in our Battle High video. Been super solid ever since. I met Mike, our drummer, probably in, I want to say like July of 2021, maybe. And we were jamming in another band called Lethal Weapon because the singer and the guitar player who writes all the music have a Riggs and Murtaugh vibe going on. Fucking old school shit that most people don't say to each other these days. So we decided to call it Lethal Weapon. It's also a sick ass name for a band. And when somebody proposed that name, I just remember everybody just laughing hysterically. And it's like so stupid and so awesome and so perfect. I just can't believe that, you know, a pun-filled thrash or crossover band hasn't already done that. So yeah, I met Mike playing in Lethal Weapon. He ended up becoming the drummer. One of the coolest motherfuckers I ever met in my life, man. Probably the best drummer I've ever played with. Definitely. There's 3 guys that come to mind. He's one of them for sure. So that was really fun getting to know Mike back then, learning some of this material with Mike and jamming with him. Yeah, and we didn't do like a full-blown tour until April 2022 when we went to Europe with Yob, you know, and by then I think we had already, yeah, definitely. We had recorded all the cover songs that were on 20 Centuries Gone, which keep in mind, like I was done with that in December 2020. So that's how long some of this shit takes, man. It's just the nature of things. And then January 2022, I'm not going to do a whole episode on 20 Centuries Gone because it's not an album. I don't know. Some people are calling it an album. To me, that ain't an album. It's just like a fun little collection of stuff that we had going on at the time. But the 2 original songs that we recorded in January of 2022 were a product of that same like 2+ year writing and demoing session that began in March of 2020. And that thing produced like 20 or 30 demos. I'm talking like full songs demoed out. I would say like 25 songs. So yeah, 3 of those became Forge Your Future. 2 of those are the opening 2 tracks on 20 Centuries Gone. And then a lot of them got reworked, thrown out. Take 1 riff from this one, 1 riff from this one, 1 riff from this one. And I was left with 8 songs, which became Ghost at the Gallows, our new album. So the next making of episode will be Ghost at the Gallows. And I'll probably do a 2-parter and get Jeff Henson on here, who worked the record. I keep trying to twist Sanford's arm to come down here. Dude, a lot of people have hit me up about chatting on this podcast, people from out of state and stuff. And I had a hard, firm rule from the beginning that I was just doing in person because it's just a different vibe. But I don't know. There's been a lot of cool people that want to talk to me and who I want to talk to. So I might start doing like Zoom stuff. I don't know. Comment below. Email me, bigriffenergy@gmail.com. Tell me if you think I should join the rest of the podcasting masses and do Zoom, or if I should keep it in person, because I'm torn on it. I'm going to talk about Malokarpatan. I'm going to say a lot of shit wrong right now. I think it's called Nordkarpatenland. They have 3-4 records, something like that. One of them's like weird and not at all like the other ones. But I would say they're like quote unquote normal releases are all really sick. This is a band from Slovakia. They wear capes and shit. If you consider first wave black metal to be like Bathory, Merciful Fate, Venom, Hellhammer, stuff like that, it's kind of like that, but it's more on the new wave of British heavy metal side. And I remember hearing this stuff and not really getting it. And then my boy Hassan, shout out to Hassan in DC, Ripping Headaches Promotions. He's making a big comeback right now. This dude took us to the Exorcist stairs back in the day. I love Hassan, man. He said something on social media about Malokarpatan's singer sounding like a troll that was pissed off because someone stole his treasure. And I was like, man, let me give this another shot. And I'm glad I did. If you can keep that in mind, like some of you might just automatically love this shit. Like the music is ripping. It's some of the best riffs of the last 20 years. It's just riff after riff after riff after riff. I should have put this dude on my best riffers ever list. Honestly, he's that badass. And then keep in mind the context. Like these dudes are from Eastern Europe. They incorporate some of like the native folk type of music of that area. Slovakia, Czech Republic, that whole, it's like spooky sounding. They use samples from like old school Slovakian music and movies and just creepy shit, man. And then get a load of this. So the guy sings in their native language, right? Which I guess is Slovakian. I don't know. I should have looked that up before this. So on one side of the insert, you have what he's singing transcribed, you know, word for word. And on the other side, you got the English translations, which I really appreciate because they got song titles such as "In the Provincial Pond, a Water Goblin has been raging for centuries." Here's one. "Not long after midnight, the abomination has crawled out of the hole." These are the song titles. These aren't lyrics, right? Here's another one. I mean, they're all good, but here's one more. "In October's solitude, silently the hunting chateau of the wolfish count is brooding." I mean, this shit is off the hook, dude. It is spooky, borderline psychedelic, just because of how like the intervals and scales and stuff that they're using. Yeah, it's just creepy. It's like a lot of fun. They don't want you to know they're having fun with it. Maybe they do. I don't know. With those song titles, they probably do want you to know they're having fun. But it is a really cool experience, this record. For fans of later period Dark Throne, Merciful Fate, I don't know. People talk a lot about Master's Hammer and stuff like that. Yeah, just spooky, reverbed out, mystical, evil, new wave of British heavy metal inspired. I'm not calling it black metal. Nope. Slovakian mythical soul destroying troll metal. That's what I'll call it. I'm not going to call it black metal. So yeah, this was a big impact on me when I was writing Forge Your Future. I love it. It's some of the best riffs ever. Their next record is really cool too. I think it's called Krupinski Own, The Fires of Krupinski or something like that. So yeah, shout out Malokarpatan. I don't know if they're still making music or not. I hope so, but check them out. Yeah, that's it. So new record coming out in a few weeks. Playing Metal Injection Fest in September. And got some more stuff in the works that I'm not talking about yet. See you next episode. Thanks, guys.